Welcome to Starlight Sci-Fi, where the unknown is explored, the strange is revealed, and the unimaginable comes to life. Today, we dive into a chilling tale about the worst mistake an alien race could ever make, kidnapping a Deathworlder child. Hold on tight, because this story is a survival guide for the foolish and the brave. The Cal-Ren were an ancient and advanced alien race, known across the galaxy for their technological prowess and biological mastery. They had conquered countless worlds and studied innumerable species, all with cold detachment. They saw the galaxy as a series of puzzles to be solved, each piece of life to be dissected and understood. But there was one species they had never encountered, a species so resilient, so brutal in its fight for survival, that it would break all their assumptions about the universe. That species was humanity. The Cal-Ren had watched Earth for centuries, sending drones and probes to study its inhabitants from a distance. They observed the violence of its nature, the wars, the brutal conditions, the raw, untamed planet. To the Cal-Ren, this was a sign of weakness, a planet full of species fighting for survival on a chaotic and dangerous world. Yet there was something in the human spirit that intrigued them. Despite the constant threat of death, humans thrived in environments that would obliterate lesser creatures. They could survive extreme cold, searing heat, radiation, and starvation, often emerging stronger for it. It fascinated the Cal-Ren. Their pride told them that no species could be this strong without being studied, analyzed, and ultimately controlled. It was in this obsession with human resilience that the Cal-Ren made their first critical error. They decided to capture a human child. Not just any child, but a young one, untouched by the complexities of adulthood and its emotional burdens. They believed that by studying a child, they could unlock the secrets of humanity's survival instincts, how they could endure so much without breaking. To the Cal-Ren, this child was a specimen, a tool to better understand the human race, and by extension, how to defeat it. They thought nothing of the child's potential to fight back, assuming that a human of such small stature, so far from home, would be powerless against their superior technology. The plan was swift, efficient, and coldly calculated. Using their advanced cloaking technology, the Cal-Ren invaded Earth's atmosphere under the cover of night, targeting a small rural town. The child's home, nestled in a quiet corner of the world, was unaware of the impending storm. The child, no more than 10 years old, was asleep in their bed when the Cal-Ren descended. In a matter of moments, the child was taken disappearing without a trace into the cold, silent ship that loomed above them. The child stirred briefly, perhaps sensing a vague disturbance in the air. But there was no scream, no frantic effort to escape. They were too young, too unaware of the grave danger closing in. The Cal-Ren, too, were unaware of the storm that was about to awaken. They thought they had succeeded in their mission, but they had failed to realize one crucial truth about human children. They are far more than what meets the eye. The Cal-Ren had made the biggest mistake of all, underestimating their captive. The Cal-Ren ship hovered above the quiet Earth town, cloaked from all detection, a shadow in the night sky. Inside, the crew was calm, almost indifferent. Their mission was simple: capture a child, conduct their studies, and return to their distant home. To them, it was just another experiment in a long line of others. Their technology was far beyond anything humanity had developed, and their ability to warp space and time itself meant that not even the most advanced human military could detect their presence. They knew they were taking a risk and snatching a child from Earth. The Cal-Ren had long ago cataloged the dangers of the planet, its extreme environments, unpredictable predators, and unpredictable inhabitants. But they believed the child would be easy to contain. After all, a human child, alone in the vastness of space, with no tools, no weapons, and no understanding of their alien captor's power, would be helpless. The Cal-Ren made their calculations quickly and decided that the child would be an easy specimen to study. What they didn't account for was the ancient survival instincts that lay dormant in the child, instincts that had been honed over generations of evolution in a violent, unforgiving world. The child had been asleep when the Cal-Ren descended. The process was swift and efficient. No alarms were triggered, no warning signals broadcasted. The child's family never even had the chance to react. By the time they woke up, the child was gone, disappeared without a trace, as if the night itself had swallowed them whole. Inside the ship, the child awoke to a strange and cold environment. The walls around them were smooth and metallic, the air thick and sterile, unfamiliar in every way. A soft hum filled the silence, and the child felt a strange pressure in the air, as though the entire ship was holding its breath. The sudden disorientation made the child freeze, but it was only for a moment. They quickly sat up, instinctively surveying their surroundings with wide, alert eyes. A child's mind might have been frail in comparison to an adult's, but one thing was certain: children are hardwired to survive, and the human spirit is a force that can never be underestimated. The Calrin had no idea that their prize was already more than they had bargained for. They had assumed that the child would panic, that they would break under the pressure of the alien environment. But instead, the child's eyes glinted with something much deeper than fear: curiosity. A curiosity that would soon become the Calrin's undoing. As the aliens prepared to begin their studies, setting up advanced scanning and biological equipment to probe this body and mind, they failed to notice the child's subtle movements. Small, seemingly insignificant gestures like the flexing of tiny fingers and the quick glances at the alien equipment hinted at something far more dangerous than they had anticipated. The child wasn't helpless. They were calculating, watching, and planning. The Calrin believed that they had captured a fragile specimen, but in reality they had unleashed a force that they couldn't comprehend. They were about to find out just how dangerous a Deathworlder child could be, and they would learn the hard way. The Calrin were meticulous in their methods, always careful to study their subjects with precision and control. They believed that the child, small and seemingly fragile, would offer no resistance to their superior technology. They had underestimated humanity's most dangerous weapon: instinct. And more importantly, they had underestimated the resilience of a Deathworlder. The first few hours after the capture were surprisingly uneventful. The Calrin scientists went about their work with clinical detachment. They used devices that scanned the child's body, analyzing every detail: genetic makeup, brain activity, and physical responses to various stimuli. Their goal was to understand how humans could survive in such harsh conditions, what made them so capable of thriving in environments that should, by all rights, destroy them. The Calrin believed they would break the child down with their advanced technology and uncover the secret to humanity's survival. What they didn't expect was the child's calm demeanor in the face of this alien invasion. But this calmness was not what it seemed. The child wasn't passive, far from it. Every movement, every glance, was calculated. The child was keenly aware of the dissection happening all around them. They weren't just being studied, they were studying their captors, too. Every alien device that hummed, every unfamiliar button or switch, every piece of equipment that the Calrin used was logged in the child's mind. They were learning just as quickly as their captors were. They weren't helpless. They were adapting. It took only a few hours for the child to devise a plan. The Calrin had been too confident in their technology, too certain that they had the upper hand. They failed to account for one crucial detail: the child was not as naive as they assumed. In the midst of a routine test, the child acted. They had been quietly observing the behavior of the Calrin scientists and had noticed something odd. One of the scanners they used to monitor their subjects had a flaw. It was a simple vulnerability, something small that the Calrin had overlooked in their arrogance. The child, with an almost uncanny sense of timing, managed to activate a hidden emergency beacon embedded within their clothing. This wasn't just a distress signal, it was a self-destruct sequence that had been built into their planet's emergency protocols, something designed to trigger when a person was in immediate danger. The child pressed a hidden switch, and the ship's systems began to respond. At first, the Calrin didn't notice, but within seconds, alarms blared across the ship. The lights flickered and the walls trembled. Panic spread through the ship's corridors as the self-destruct countdown began. The Calrin scrambled to regain control, their calm scientific demeanor evaporating in the face of unexpected chaos. They attempted to deactivate the countdown, but the child had been thorough in their sabotage. The Calrin were no longer in control of their own ship. The systems they had carefully designed to keep their captives in check were now spiraling out of control. The child had become the architect of their own escape. Every action they had taken, no matter how small or seemingly insignificant, had led them to this moment. The Calrin, once confident in their superiority, were now struggling to contain a disaster of their own making. As the ship continued to shake and the countdown drew nearer to zero, the Cal-Rin realized just how badly they had miscalculated. They had thought they were the hunters, but now they were the prey. The child was no longer a captive. They were a force of nature, and the Cal-Rin had no idea how to stop it. The first lesson had been taught: never underestimate a Deathworlder, especially a child. And this was only the beginning. The Cal-Rin were panicked, scrambling to contain the damage caused by the child's unexpected sabotage. Their ship, a marvel of advanced alien engineering, was starting to break apart from within. The self-destruct sequence had triggered a cascade of failures in the ship's power systems, causing everything to malfunction at once. The alarms blared relentlessly, echoing down cold, metallic corridors. The once pristine control panels flickered and sparked as the ship's central core struggled to maintain control. The Cal-Rin officers, who had once been so confident in their dominance, now found themselves in a desperate struggle to stop a catastrophe they had never foreseen. Amidst the chaos, the child sat in the middle of the room, calm and quiet, seemingly unfazed by the pandemonium around them. To the Cal-Rin, this was unfathomable. They had expected tears, screams, perhaps even frantic begging, but the human child showed none of these responses. Instead, they were observing, biding their time. They understood one thing that the Cal-Rin did not. In this situation, it was better to wait for the perfect moment to act. The Cal-Rin were too distracted by their own efforts to save the ship, failing to notice the small movements of their prisoner. The child had already studied the ship's layout during the initial moments of their captivity. They had learned the ship's corridors, its ventilation shafts, and the locations of critical control stations. The Cal-Rin had underestimated the child's ability to understand and adapt, thinking them incapable of grasping anything beyond basic survival. But the child's mind was sharp, filled with an innate understanding of how to exploit vulnerabilities. The child took action with a swiftness that stunned the crew. With the ship's systems failing, the central security systems were no longer functional. The child used this to their advantage, slipping past the guards with ease. They weren't just running for escape, they were carefully dismantling the Cal-Rin's carefully laid traps as they went, disabling security cameras, opening locked doors, and overriding force fields. Every corner of the ship, once a symbol of the Cal-Rin's superiority, was now a tool for the child's escape. As the child ventured deeper into the heart of the ship, they found the ship's command center, the very place where the Cal-Rin had coordinated their plans to study and control the human species. The command center was heavily guarded, but with the ship in disarray, the guards were distracted, racing against time to repair the damage. The child slipped by them unnoticed, using their small frame and speed to blend into the chaos of malfunctioning systems. The escape wasn't flawless. The child encountered a few obstacles along the way, but each time they found a way to improvise, using whatever they could find to outwit the Cal-Rin. Whether it was a discarded tool or an alien device, the child's creativity and survival instinct guided them through the labyrinth of corridors. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the child stumbled upon a hidden escape pod, one of many the Cal-Rin had overlooked in their arrogance. This pod, designed for emergencies, was fully functional and contained a variety of supplies, including a rudimentary navigation system. The child, exhausted but determined, forced open the hatch and climbed inside. They sealed the door behind them, and for a brief moment, there was silence. But the silence was short-lived. The escape pod's engines hummed to life, and the child, now in control of their own fate, activated the launch sequence. The Cal-Rin had made one final mistake. They thought they could contain a Deathworlder child, but they had just unleashed something far more dangerous, a force that was now free to roam the stars, carrying with it a message that the Cal-Rin would never forget. The pod shot out into the void, leaving behind a crippled ship and a shipwreck of Cal-Rin pride. As the child rocketed away from the chaos, the Cal-Rin were left in stunned silence. The real test had just begun. The child had escaped, but the cost to the Cal-Rin would be far greater than they could imagine, and they would soon discover that underestimating a Deathworlder child would be their downfall. The escape pod hurtled through the void, drifting away from the wreckage of the Cal-Rin ship. Inside, the child sat alone, a mixture of exhaustion and triumph in their eyes. The ship had been crippled, the alarm still echoing faintly in the distance. The child's pulse raced, but it wasn't just from the rush of escape. It was from the uncertainty ahead, floating in deep space, with nothing but the stars and a barely functional escape pod to guide them. The child had no idea where they were or how far they had drifted. But one thing was clear: they had survived. What the child didn't know was that they weren't as alone as they thought. Back aboard the Cal Rin ship, the situation was dire. The ship's core was failing, systems flickering and sparking in every corner of the vessel. Amid the chaos, a lone Cal Rin officer, a scientist who had been part of the team studying the human child, was quietly making their own decision. This officer had been watching the child's actions closely, growing increasingly disturbed by the brutality with which the Cal Rin had treated their captive. Unlike the others, this officer hadn't been blinded by the arrogance of the Cal Rin. They had witnessed the child's extraordinary resilience, their ability to adapt, and had come to a quiet realization: humanity was not something to be controlled or dissected, it was something to be respected. In the wake of the child's sabotage and escape, this officer saw an opportunity, a dangerous one, but an opportunity nonetheless. With the ship spiraling toward destruction, the officer made their way to a secondary chamber, where they accessed the emergency escape systems. It was a desperate, last-minute act, and the officer knew the risks. The Cal Rin had always been proud of their superiority, but this officer's conscience had taken a different path. They knew they couldn't allow the child to die in the madness they had helped create. With a quick set of commands, the officer activated a secondary pod, not listed on the ship's official manifest, a hidden escape route designed for emergencies. The officer, despite their knowledge that they might never be able to return to their own people, climbed into the pod. They knew the Cal Rin were unlikely to survive the ship's imminent collapse, but there was still a chance to save the human child, a chance to right some of the wrongs that had been done. As the pod ejected from the ship, it darted through the stars, following a different path, one that led directly to the child's escape pod. It was no small feat. The officer had to rely on the ship's emergency systems to track the child's location, and every second counted. The officer's heart pounded, their mind racing with the reality of what they were about to do. They could have simply fled, joining the others in the hope of survival, but they chose to risk everything to find the child. The child, unaware of the officer's decision, continued to drift in the cold of space. The escape pod's fragile systems blinked intermittently, showing signs of power failure. Yet the child remained calm, hands working quickly to attempt repairs, using their sharp mind to keep the pod running just enough to stay alive. In those quiet moments, a sound broke through the faint, rhythmic hum of another pod approaching. The child turned toward the small viewport, eyes wide with a mixture of fear and curiosity. A new presence had appeared in the vast emptiness of space. The Cal Rin officer had finally caught up. They initiated the pod's docking sequence, slowly and carefully attaching to the child's pod. The officer's voice, if it could be heard, was distant and disembodied. But it was clear. They weren't here to hurt the child. They were here to help. Inside the escape pod, the child stared at the officer through the viewport, uncertain of the stranger's intentions. Trust was a rare thing in this galaxy, especially when the stranger was one of the beings who had once tried to control them. But there was something in the officer's eyes, something sincere that told the child they weren't a threat. For the first time since the kidnapping, the child felt a glimmer of hope. In the vast emptiness of space, amidst the wreckage of their enemies, an unlikely ally had emerged. But the child knew better than to trust easily. The galaxy was a cold and unforgiving place, and survival came with its own set of rules. But for now, the officer had done something that no one else had. They had given the child a chance. And that chance, however slim, was all the child needed. The child's eyes remained fixed on the Cal Rin officer, their expression a mix of caution and curiosity. The officer's pod had docked with the escape pod, and the soft, rhythmic sound of life support systems filling the air was the only sign of life. Outside, the cold, vast emptiness of space stretched endlessly. There was no planet in sight, no sign of civilization, just the endless dark void. In that silence, the child's mind raced. What was this officer's true intention? The Cal Rin were known for their cold, calculating ways, treating other species as mere subjects for study. This officer had once been part of that system, and yet they were now offering help. Could this really be an act of kindness, or was there a darker motive hidden beneath the surface? Trusting anyone in the galaxy was dangerous, but trusting a Calren? That was near impossible. The officer's pod opened slowly, and a figure clad in the sleek, metallic armor of the Calren emerged. The figure paused at the entrance, as though waiting for the child to make the first move. The child, small but resourceful, observed the officer carefully. Despite the alien's calm and deliberate actions, the child was not fooled. Years of survival on a dangerous, hostile world had taught them to trust their instincts above all else. The officer, sensing the child's wariness, raised a hand in a gesture of peace. The child's eyes narrowed, but they didn't move away. There was no immediate threat. Still, something didn't sit right with them. "I know you don't trust me." The officer's voice came through the intercom in a calm, neutral tone. "I wouldn't expect you to. But I am here to help. You've escaped a disaster, but you're not safe yet." The words struck the child in a strange way. The officer wasn't offering a threat, nor was there any attempt to intimidate them. Instead, the officer seemed almost human. The child's mind processed this information slowly, unwilling to jump to any conclusions. "Your ship, the Calren ship, is crippled," the officer continued. "It won't last much longer. We have no time. You need to trust me. If you stay in this pod, you'll die. There's no other choice." The officer's words were blunt, but the urgency in their tone was undeniable. The child was smart enough to understand that their situation was dire. There was no guarantee that the officer wasn't manipulating them, but there were few options left. The escape pod was already low on fuel, and the chances of drifting into a habitable system were slim. The child's survival instinct kicked in. It was time to make a decision, and fast. Reluctantly, the child's small hand moved toward the control panel, activating the pod's hatch. The officer stepped inside, and without a word, they began to work. The Calren officer knew how to operate the pod's systems and immediately began making adjustments, bringing the pod to life with a few precise keystrokes. The child watched closely, taking note of every movement. This was not the time to be passive. As the pod hummed back to life, the child felt a strange, cautious relief. The officer had not lied about the immediate danger. The escape pod's systems flickered, the power draining rapidly. The child knew that their options were running out, but with the officer's help, the pod's engines roared to life, and the pair began to move away from the doomed Calren ship. The child's gaze flicked once more to the officer. The alien was focused on the task at hand, operating the ship's navigation controls with practiced ease. The child, still unsure but increasingly aware of the officer's skills, watched them with an intensity that was impossible to ignore. The void of space seemed endless, but the escape pod slowly picked up speed. As the distance between the two pods increased, the child felt the weight of their decision settle in. For better or worse, they had allied with the officer. Their survival depended on it now. But deep in their heart, the child knew that trust was a fragile thing, especially when the consequences of betrayal could mean death. The journey ahead was uncertain, but one thing was clear: the Calren officer had changed the rules, and whether the child could trust them or not, they had no choice but to follow.
The escape pod soared through the vastness of space, a fragile speck against the infinite darkness. Inside, the child sat silently, watching the stars pass by the viewport, their tiny face illuminated by the soft glow of the control panel. The Calren officer, now an uneasy ally, focused on the ship's controls, hands moving quickly but with precision, guiding the pod away from the doomed Calren vessel. Liang looked over at the pilot. The child knew that their fate was tied to this officer's actions, but the feeling of uncertainty gnawed at them. What did he mean? The officer had insisted they work together, but the child's mind remained alert, vigilant. They had seen too much violence, too much treachery to blindly trust anyone, even in this desperate situation. The officer had saved their life, true, but was it out of guilt? A desire for redemption, or something more sinister? Every instinct the child possessed screamed to be wary, to never let their guard down. But, at that moment, there were no better options. The officer was their best shot at survival in a universe that seemed hell-bent on wiping them out. The officer glanced toward the child as they worked, noticing the wariness in the child's eyes. "You don't trust me," they said, their tones soft but serious. "I understand. You're right not to. I've been part of the system that tried to control you, tried to dissect you. And I can't undo that. But I can help you escape, if you'll let me." The child didn't respond. Instead, they observed, their gaze never leaving the officer. There was no immediate threat, but trust didn't come easily. It was something that had to be earned. And the officer, despite their help, had yet to prove themselves worthy of that trust. Every word was weighed, every action scrutinized. The child knew that the officer's motivations could be complex, perhaps even conflicting. Redemption was a powerful drive, but so too was self-preservation. Days passed, the endless blackness of space stretching on as the two drifted further from the wreckage of the Calrin ship. The officer was cautious, using every tool at their disposal to keep the pod's systems stable, but they were running low on supplies. Fuel was dwindling, and food was almost gone. The officer's calm exterior remained, but the child could sense the rising tension. The situation was growing desperate, and it was only a matter of time before the pod would have to land. Somewhere. Anywhere. Just to survive. Ishal. The child remained silent, their mind racing with possible options. The officer, despite their assistance, was still an unknown quantity. Could they be trusted in the long run? Or was this all part of some new manipulation? What would the Calrin officer do when they reached civilization? Would they turn the child in, claim them as a prize, or hand them over to their superiors? But something unexpected happened. As the days wore on, the officer's actions started to speak louder than words. They didn't treat the child like a specimen, like an object to be studied. Instead, they shared the last of their food, even though it meant they would go without. They showed genuine concern for the child's well-being, explaining how the systems worked, even allowing the child to help with minor repairs. Every little act of kindness, though small, chipped away at the fortress of suspicion that the child had built around their heart. Still, the child remained on edge. The galaxy was full of lies, and they had learned to rely on no one but themselves. But the officer's quiet consistency began to have an effect. The child didn't let their guard down completely. Trust would take time, but there was something in the officer's actions that couldn't be ignored. Perhaps the officer had changed, or maybe, just maybe, they had always been different from the rest of their kind. The pod, now powered by a fragile but functioning engine, began to approach a distant, uninhabited planet. The officer, aware of the dwindling supplies, had no choice but to make a landing attempt. The rough terrain below would be a challenge, but survival in space was even more uncertain. The planet, though barren, was their best hope. The officer navigated with care, preparing for a rough landing. As the pod descended, the child's heart raced, a mix of fear and hope filling them. They had no idea what awaited them on this strange, deserted world. Would the officer remain true to their word, or would they abandon the child once they had nothing more to gain? The unknown loomed large, but one thing was certain. The child had survived once again, and in a universe as unforgiving as this, that was a victory in itself. Bade forth like an alien whisper, the pod touched down with a jolt, the harsh landing confirming that their journey had only just begun. The door of the pod opened, revealing the alien world outside. A world full of danger, but also potential. The child stepped forward, eyes scanning the horizon, ready for whatever would come next. They had survived the Calrin, and now they would face the future alone, with only the faint glimmer of an unlikely ally by their side. If you enjoyed this wild ride through the cosmos, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Starlight Sci-Fi for more incredible stories from the farthest reaches of space. Stay curious, and remember, survival is always a choice.